co-host tonight on the wellnesscrusaders.com. I'm the founder of stopsprayingglyphosate.com. Normally, I'm talking about toxins like Roundup and other pesky pesticides that are harming our gut-brain connection. But tonight, I am actually quite honored. I am interviewing Mike Glover, founder and CEO of Fieldcraft right here in Provo, Utah. Mike Glover is a former Green Beret and a well-respected expert in tactical training and survival skills. Mike, again, is the founder and the CEO of Fieldcraft Survival, where he focuses on educating individuals like me on preparedness, self-reliance, and survival strategies. His book, Prepared, is an excellent guide to surviving with everything happening in the world today. Recently, Mike Glover was found himself in a situation that he could not have prepared for. He was falsely arrested and now shedding light on the justice system and accountability within the legal system. So I'd like to introduce Mike Glover. Hi there, Mike.
Hi, Laurie. Thanks for having me.
Oh my gosh, I'm quite honored to have you on my podcast. I have to tell you, I interview a lot of people with courage, but no one really ever like you, a Green Beret who has spent his entire career, over 18 years plus, fighting for the freedom for the United States, for my freedom and everyone else's freedom. So thank you for being with me tonight. There aren't many people in my life that I've known fighting their career for our freedom and protecting the U.S. So I would personally like to say thank you for all that you have done for America. You are one of the more courageous Americans speaking out, being prepared on how to protect their families. I know that I personally have taken some of your classes in Amber's class, and I have to tell you, it was awesome. I think it was mostly when I walked through that room, with the SIRT pistol and not really knowing what was going to pop out. But because I prepare and I'm always shooting, I was pretty okay with how I handled that, even though I was a tad bit nervous. But I got to tell you, Amber was awesome. So first of all, before we get started, because we have a lot to talk about, just tell the audience a little bit about yourself, and then we'll go into the situation.
Yeah. So I joined the Army very young, at the age of 17. I come from a military family. It's really the only professional career field that I've known. I say that even with having 8 to 10 years of experience running a company that focuses on preparedness. Really, my mind and all of the behaviors that I've developed over time come from a military organization. The specific organization being the U.S. Army, and the specific tribe that I belong to was in special operations. So I did that for 20 years, which included time in service in the military. I spent some time as a U.S. government contractor for the Central Intelligence Agency, and decided one day, almost a decade ago, that I wanted to do something for myself. So I decided to start a company called Fieldcraft Survival, focused on preparing everybody, civilians, law enforcement, military, everybody, for the worst case scenario. I felt like I had a cumulative experience of worst case scenarios, intentionally putting myself in harm's way, and came out relatively unscathed. And I always was curious to why that was. Like, why do men and women serve in high functioning, very dangerous roles and jobs in the military? And why do they win? And so I took a lot of those attributes and characteristics and applied it to how I teach Fieldcraft Survival, which is not Mike Glover. It's a conduit, for example, for people like Amber, who is certainly a subject matter expert, reaching people who are interested in the realm of preparedness. So in a nutshell, that's that's my life.
That's awesome. I love fieldcraft. So recently, Mike, you found yourself in a situation that you were probably a little bit unprepared for yourself. And I know there are probably others out there like you, but because I follow a lot of what you do, it was shocking to me when I heard how it happened, let alone how bad the justice system is here in Utah. I found myself quite irate, quite angry. And when you first came out and you started talking about what had happened, I just felt we had to get your story out. I mean, we all know that social media and big tech, they're only showing little snippets of, everything happened. We're all censored, from you to Jason Preston to, Dr. Richard Fleming, Dr. Pierre Corey, everybody's censored and they're taken down. And you can't find the truth on anything. So what we're seeing are the snippets of, whatever the people are posting on social media. And some of it, I just have to tell you, is like shit, because it's not really what happened. So, and it's horrible what happened to you. I believe that getting the truth out on what happened is so imperative. I was really honored recently to spend a little bit of time with your beautiful wife and your children. And I have to tell you, after watching your kids and they were driving around and the tractors and everything, your daughter won my heart. She was on the tractor and she was having a hard time making a turn, saying, I can't do it. I can't do it. And I'm like, come on, Pen, you can do it. You can do it. And she's pulling the steering wheel so hard. And at the same time, she's like, I'm doing it. I'm doing it. And as soon as she turned it, she goes, I did it. I'm strong. And she won my heart that day. Your family is so together on how you live and how you support each other as a team. And again, we all know how mainstream media fills the world with disinformation and lies. We see it happening all over the world. So why don't we start by talking about what happened on May 1st, something that there's no way anyone could have been prepared for what happened to you.
Yeah, it's crazy because this seems like so long ago, but also seems so fresh because I'm still dealing with things, including the Department of Child and Family Services. I'm dealing with them, and I'll start out by saying, since this happened, all criminal charges that I was initially charged with, which happened to be 30 years of charges, 30 years of felony charges, have all been dismissed. But there is a component of the DCFS side that still exists that I'm just working through, but it's still very uncomfortable because it involves my children. And relatively speaking, my children had nothing to do with this specific instance that took place on May 1st. So I will say, one, I'm very uncomfortable talking about anything as private as circumstances like this. But two, I'm willing to do so because I think it's important to, one, reflect on the experience and make sure people understand the totality of circumstances, as a lot of people in social media, a lot of people in free markets have supported me as an entrepreneur and as a company, which has allowed me to live a lifestyle of being successful as an entrepreneur. And so I feel obligated. I really do. I know a lot of people don't feel obligated because they're like, I'm keeping this to myself. But a lot of the opinion of people is important in the context, especially when it comes to people like Amber, a lot of hardworking people that work for me at Fieldcraft Survival who have been affected by this and impacted by this in a negative way based on what happened that morning. So that morning on May 1st, me and my spouse were scheduled to police up the whole family and go to Montana. I was headed to Andy Stump's in Kalispell, Montana, to do a podcast on the Cleared Hot podcast, to do a preparedness seminar, which I often do at Black Rifle Coffee in Kalispell. And I also was going to do a business meet with Andy to talk about some future engagements, including a show that we're about to do. I'm actually filming for it next week, called Focal Point, focused on current events. So we had all of these things to look forward to, not only from a business perspective, but also Andy's one of my best friends. So we go to pack out, and I noticed something's wrong with my spouse that morning, but I also had noticed times before, including the night before. The night before, my spouse texted me and she said the same thing twice on the text. And I was outside with with the twins. She was upstairs with our infant son. And my twins were outside with me doing like a s'mores fire over like one of these little solo stoves. And we were just having a good evening. She texted me, and she texted the same text twice and said, "I'm so sorry. I'm just out of it. Like my brain is just out of it." And she had often reflected this kind of experience of being out of it. Now, in hindsight, learning a lot about what she was going through from a lot of different people around me in my friend circle, but also from her personally, she was going through a lot of postpartum issues. Also, the stressors of living with an entrepreneur who's going 100 miles an hour, which I get from my beautiful mother, who's worked her entire life working 18 hours a day. That is who I am. That is very stressful for a spouse because I'm driven that way. So the culmination of a lot of things was causing a lot of psychological issues that were impacting us, that all the signs were there, but you never pay attention to the signs until the catastrophic event takes place. So, right. So we were having this kind of conflict, and the conflict started actually over her being critical of what the kids were doing with our infant son. And I didn't see it that way, and it wasn't that way, but she was just in a different emotional state that morning. And so a lot of the things that were supposed to be baseline normal were both elevated from me and her because we were both in fight or flight, talking to you about some of the things that we were going through. We were just both stressed out. So long story short, in that segment of the conversation, it basically came to a head to where from my perspective, I thought she was being irresponsible with our infant son by acting emotional and argumentative with our son. She thought the same thing of me, confronting her over her running upstairs essentially with our son, and then us being in an argument while our son was involved. What I tried to do was grab my son from her and just say, "Hey, you need to stop." And I went to grab my son, and she pulled away, and I was like, "Okay, this is not good. We need to this is completely de-escalated. You need to put on some clothes," because at the time she was going to give our son a bath. And I said, "You need to leave. You need to go blow off some steam, go for a drive or whatever." That is the extent of a 30-second interaction. When she left with my infant son that morning. I was not surprised to look at my phone to know where she was at because we track each other's locations. And I said, "Oh, she's at the hospital." And I looked at it and went, "Oh, she said Leland was having some kind of respiratory issues, and he actually had a serious flu that he was dealing with and trying to overcome." So she had mentioned that morning that she was going to take him to the hospital. So I thought nothing of it when I saw that she was at the hospital. I actually texted her and said, "Look, I'm just going to go to Montana with the kids." And I told her I let Pearl in, our dog, and I let the chickens out. I let them out of the chicken coop. I didn't think anything of it. Had no inkling or idea my life was about to change. Get in the meet up with some employees who come to my house to kind of give me some T-shirts and stuff I'm bringing to Andy's place. And then I load my kids up in the Sprinter van, and we're headed to Montana. That on the way, about 30 minutes into the drive, I get a call from one of my close friends who's close friends with members of Provo PD, the police department in the town that I live, in the town that Phil Craft Survival is. That conversation was, "Hey, the police are looking for you." And I'm like, "What? That doesn't even make sense to me. What are you talking about?" So I immediately put on my police scanner on my phone that's hooked up to the Bluetooth in my Sprinter van. And as soon as I do that, I immediately hear a dispatch call out, "We have an armed and dangerous veteran who's known to carry, and we need backup." Later discovered this because I have Ring cameras at my home that a whole slew of police officers showed up at my house, armed to the teeth with their guns drawn or guns out. And they were coming to roll me up. And I was like, what is going on? So I get turned around and I'm like, listen, I don't know what's going on, but can you find out for me? So Greg calls a police buddy of ours who talks to him and says, they want to question me about what happened this morning. And I'm like, what happened? Okay, no idea what happened this morning, except the argument that we were in. And I'm very confused. I don't understand what's happening, but why would I have to go to the police station? Why would I have to turn around and do this? And so I'm thinking, oh, something's going on and something's not good. I drop off my children with their mother, which luckily was like right next to where I was at the time. I turn around, I drive back, and an hour goes by because I have to do coordination to drop off my vehicle and also disarm myself because I'm an armed, law-abiding citizen. I didn't want to walk into a situation where I just heard these guys calling for backup because I'm an armed and dangerous veteran. I don't even know what that means. So I come back, I go into the Provo Police Department. I talked to 3 people before this happened. Greg Lappin, who is a good friend of mine, who's also retired law enforcement, 20-year retired law enforcement. Dee Dee, who is essentially does operations for Phil Kraus Survival. And I talked to a lawyer. I don't have a criminal lawyer. I called a lawyer that I used through a custody case that was a lawyer that Neil Curry, my friend who tragically passed away the year prior, had put me in contact with for his marital things. I called him and was like, hey, I don't know what's going on, but I think I should talk to you. And he's like, okay, so give me the gist. I gave him the gist. He said, when you get to the police department, when they ask you to talk specifics, I want you to tell them that you want your lawyer present. And I'm like, okay, I trust you. I don't know how this works. Never been in a police department except to train them. I'll take your cue. I get to the police department. They ask me what happened. I told them exactly what happened. They get to the point where they say, okay, so then tell me the specifics of what happened when you guys went upstairs. And I said, I would like to have my attorney present. I didn't even know how to say it out loud, Laurie. I was like fumbling through that. Like, I want my attorney present. And my friend Greg was there. And I looked at Greg. I was like, is that what I'm supposed to say? And Greg's like, yeah. And I'm like, okay, I want my attorney present. As soon as I said that, now this is 2 to 3 hours after this event took place, he stands me up, the officer who's in charge from Provo PD, stands me up. This kid's like 25 years old, stands me up, tells me to turn around. He does a cursory search. He puts me in handcuffs. He puts me in his patrol car. And about 45 minutes later, he books me to jail on 30 years of charges.
Which is crazy.
It's unfathomable because me not knowing better, I wouldn't know how this system works until I went through this circumstance. Everybody I've told, including law enforcement officers, including detectives, investigators, marshals, all this friend network that comes from a long history of law enforcement, every single one of them has told me that's not how it works. Like, they're doing an investigation. You mean to tell me you asked for your lawyer and they stood you up and put you in handcuffs and booked you? And I'm like, well, how is it supposed to work? Well, if the officer is doing an investigation for something so egregious as serious bodily injury, aggravated assault, that carries with the litany of charges 30 plus years of charges, they would do a thorough investigation, meaning they would actually want to wait for your lawyer to show up so you can actually talk to them so they could figure things out. They didn't do any of that. They booked me on 30 years of charges. It shocked everybody that I was with that found out what was going on. It shocked the correction officers that were booking me, where they were like, what? You're being booked on what? Mike, did you almost kill somebody? I was like, dude, I didn't even touch my spouse physically. And they said, well, one of the corrections officers that booked me, who were very professional from Utah County Jail, all of them were, one of the officers who booked me said, you just got booked on the equivalent of somebody pulling up to their house, getting out of their car, beating their wife with a baseball bat in front of their kids, and putting them into a coma after they kidnapped them. That was the charges that I caught. And so since then, my entire life since that day has been completely turned inside out. and I'm just now coming up for the first breaths of air.
No, you're operating in fight flight, which you spent probably 18 years doing as a Green Beret anyway.
Yeah. Yeah.
And which is horrible. So when that happened and you actually went to the jail cell, shouldn't have been there, falsely, can you describe your initial reaction from like an emotional perspective when they closed the jail cell door?
Yeah, that was so I've been through, I did 9 combat rotations to war. I did 6 rotations with the Central Intelligence Agency. I've had buddies die in my arms. Like, I've been through a lot of trauma through a military and government experience and in generally in life, like many people. This is the most traumatic thing I've ever been through. The combination of going to jail for a week, getting my child taken from me and me and my spouse has been the most traumatic thing I've ever been through. What I realized when that jail cell closed, I was told by the people that I was in the jail cell with and the people that were consulting me legally during this process that I potentially could be in jail for years before I even get the opportunity to tell my side. Because of the litany of aggravated and egregious charges I was booked with, there is no innocent until proven guilty. You're guilty, and then they'll figure out if you're innocent along the way. And if you are, well, there's not even our bad. It's just like, that's just how it works. Because I was told, based on the charges I was booked on, I was a no bail. I actually was a no bail, meaning I had no opportunity to bail. They told me I was a no bail. They did a community assessment of me and said I was the most dangerous and that they recommend the highest restrictions in jail, including solitary confinement, which I was moved to. And then I was told that I would likely be in jail until I get a trial, which in the state of Utah and Utah County could be up to and beyond a year, which I was with
freaking crazy,
which is insane. And so one, what I realized is being in jail, there are some people who like being in jail. I actually was which is crazy because I remember this one guy when we came out of our jail cell, we got 90 minutes a day to come out outside of our jail cell. And my jail cell was 15 center blocks long and 8 center blocks wide. I had the ability to do push-ups in place, but really nothing else because we didn't have the room. I was jailed with one other inmate, in this case, a young gentleman who had been put there for aggravated assault. There are guys in jail that were with me that were very highly restricted that loved being there because they had 3 squares a day. They didn't have a job. They didn't have a responsibility, and they just kind of hung out. There were other guys who hated being there because they wanted to be with their families, but they knew what they were doing was like paying their dues. And so there were some guys who accepted the reality and were like, it's just something I got to do because I'm going to do my time. And I had respect for those guys. Like, you're doing your time to society and you're getting back to it. And then there's guys like me who had no reason, no understanding why I was there. I would look down at my hands and just envision my children's hands in them because my twins, I walk with them. They're 4, about to be 5. And everything reminded me of them. I couldn't even drink water out of our little sink because the running water reminded me of the garden hose where my daughter, every time she got a hold of it, would try to spray me. And I was having a meltdown. The only thing that was keeping me tethered to reality and honestly keeping me from self-harm was a King James version of the Bible that I read out loud, pacing my jail cell, and then breathing exercises that I teach in my own resilience blocks at Fieldcraft Survival that were just keeping me hanging on. It was a desperate situation. It didn't get easier. I thought it would with a little bit of time, but on day 7, it was just as traumatic as day 1.
And you were raised Southern Baptist, so you have a pretty strong faith-based relationship with, I'll say God because I'm a believer, so you've got a pretty strong faith base. So and it was a dark journey for you. So reading the Bible to get you through for those 6 nights, where did it take you when you were released? How did you feel? And then tell me about the second Mike Glover out there. How did that come into play?
Yeah. So the second Mike Glover, just touching on it, there was another gentleman named Michael A. Glover. And for those who don't know how the system works, it's similar to any institution that uses last name, first name, middle initial to identify anybody. There are 3 indications while in jail that they potentially had the wrong person, which is why, for example, I was considered no bail. Under normal circumstances, you could have people who have potentially murdered somebody, manslaughter charges, very egregious crimes that are getting bailed. But I was told I was no bail initially. When I was moved to solitary confinement on day 1, the corrections officers stopped me in the hallway, 2 of them. One of them being a supervisor, a sergeant. And he said, "Why are we moving Mike to solitary confinement?" And the young corrections officer who was moving me said, "It was called down. They told me to move him." And the sergeant and another senior guy looked at each other and went, "That's not right." And they looked at me and they said, "Mike, do you want to be in solitary?" And I was like, this is the oddest. It was comical because it was so odd. I was like standing in a hallway in jail in fluorescent orange flip-flops and a jumpsuit, handcuffed, being moved to solitary confinement from general population. And they're asking me, like, "Do you want to go to solitary?" And I look at them and I go, "Is that a good thing or a bad thing?" And they looked at me and went, "Oh, no, it's bad." And I was like, "Yeah, then I don't want to do that." And then the guy goes, "Oh, well, we thought maybe you wanted to go because everybody knows who you are." Like every correction officer, like I love them. I love corrections. My dad was a retired corrections officer and a retired military police officer. But they literally were shaking my hand in front of prisoners. And I'm like, "Don't do that." and I'm like, it was cool because they were very professional to everybody. But they were asking me, like, maybe you wanted to be separated because you didn't want to be with inmates that actually were criminals. And I said, no. I don't know what's going on. I don't even know why I'm here. But whatever you guys think, you guys are the professionals. I couldn't even do this because my hands were behind my back, handcuffed. I said, "You guys just tell me what you want to do." And they went, "No, he's not going to solitary." And they turned me around. And I was like, "That's weird. Like, why would they debate me going to solitary?" And I asked my fellow inmates, "Hey, what's solitary?" And they're like, "It's called the hole." And it's called the hole for a reason because there's a hole in the ground. They usually take your clothes because it's for people who want to kill themselves and people who have committed the most egregious crimes. And I said, "Well, is that bad?" And they're like, "Dude, you're in a hole and they don't let you out at all. You do everything in the hole. You pee in the hole, you defecate in the hole, and they don't let you out ever for 30 days. And I was like, "Oh my gosh." Like, okay, yeah, definitely didn't want that. And I'm like, "Dude, why are they treating me like this? Like, what's going on?" Well, I go to my first hearing 3 days in, and they go to do the hearing, and everybody's acting weird. Like the judge is acting very aggressive. The state attorney's like, "No bail. This guy he deserves to be in here." And I'm like, "What is going on?" So I'm like, "Wait a minute, something's going on. Something's not right." And I'm talking to my lawyer, and my lawyer's like, "I don't know why. They just have a hard on for you." And I'm like, "Dude, I didn't do anything. 2, even if I did do something, why would that not justify me getting bail?" So they actually, on the 3rd day, when I was supposed to get bail, they didn't ask for it because they said it was a no bail situation. And if they asked for it, they would have got 1 shot. And after that 1 shot, administratively, no matter what, I would have never gotten another hearing. So
Wow.
I was like, "Dude, what's going on?" So then they get to the next hearing, and this is day 7. And my lawyer starts the conversation by saying, "Everybody, I want just everybody to understand, this is not the Michael A. Glover that everybody thinks he is." And I'm like, "Like what?" And then everybody's like, yeah, for the record, this isn't the Michael A. Glover. Well, I found out later, after I got out of jail and bailed, they had confused me with another Michael A. Glover. And when they said no bail, my lawyer came back and said, he's a no bail. Like, why would he be a no bail? And they said, Michael Aubrey Glover. And they were like, oh, let's look into it. And they went, oh, yeah, he can get bail. So they held me for a week when I should have been there for 48 hours. They held me for a week because they thought I was another guy. Oh, by the way, Michael A. Glover has a history of violence and a history of criminal behavior. That same information was relayed to DCFS, Department of Child Family Services, because when Jessica on day 2 recanted her entire statement that she made falsely on day 1, day 2, she said, I'm sorry, that didn't happen. I was out of my mind. And here's what actually happened. When she made that statement, that recantment was never supplemented into the police report. So nobody ever knew about it. And all they were running off with, Michael Glover is a historical bad guy who we need to keep behind bars for as long as possible. Because on day 2, when she went to the jail to actually sign the waiver to lift the protection order against her so I can contact her, they said, oh, no. He can't lift that protection order on him. He's got a criminal history, blah, blah, blah. And he's like, Mike's never been in jail ever. And they're like, Michael, and I don't even know the guy's middle name, Andrew Glover. Like, no, that's not who this is. And they're like, oh, our mistake. And then DCFS interviews Jessica and says to Jessica, Mike's criminal history is very concerning. We have access to it. We see everything that he did, and it's very concerning. We can't tell you, but his history is very bad. And Jessica's like, are they lying to me to manipulate me? And what we actually think is DCFS had Michael A. Glover's criminal history and thought it was me. And so this entire time, all these things are happening and rolling into place when the reality was they were looking at the wrong guy the entire time. On Facebook, there were people commenting, yeah, this Michael A. Glover is a piece of trash anyway. He has a long history of abuse, domestic violence, and they need to keep him behind bars. And people were like, what? Oh, yeah, this Michael A. Glover. And what people were doing was when they saw this initial stuff coming out, because my affidavit was leaked on day 2, they were doing these jail searches looking for Michael A. Glover, found that guy, and were releasing his criminal record representing me. And so I lost book deals. I lost sponsorships. I was relieved from my company, put into a separate position. I mean, this is like Sig Sauer, a company I had operated with and did business with for 2 years, dropped me like a bad habit like this because of all the bad PR that came out. So yeah, I tethered to the only thing that I knew as a foundation of who I am. I leaned on God heavily. And not just God, but my faith and belief in Jesus Christ. And that saved me when I was 12 years old, and it saved me when I was in a jail cell. So, it was something that I call it a restoration, right? A lot of times in faith, when we have life getting in the way and masking and creating this false reality that we're so in love with, we start to prophesize and fall in love with this devotion to these really material and immaterial things that mean nothing.
Agreed.
When you're stripped nearly naked to your core and you have nothing left, you remember who you are. And I think that's what it was. I think God had a plan. To be honest, like, there is no other way to describe what happened to me personally and emotionally, and also in my faith. God stripped me down to the bare necessities of breathing and getting through life moment to moment to show me and demonstrate to me what I was doing right and then what I was doing wrong. One of the things I was doing wrong, as I prayed and discovered in my own way, was worshiping my work and a belief that somehow a good deed was going to get me into heaven versus God's grace alone. And I think that was a solid lesson learned. And I see you, and I'm picking up what you're laying down. And so that's the good that came out of the bad, but I still continue to deal with the recklessness and misconduct and incompetence of a broken institution, of several broken institutions.
Right, right. And I mean, look at Paul in the Bible. I mean, he spent, you know, the end part of his life in jail, but wrote a third of the Bible at the end. And I think
Yeah.
that basically what ends up happening with everyone, including myself, there's something in life that brings you to your knees. And in my case, it was my teenage son who basically just started hanging out with the wrong people. And it has hit that experience going through it has led me to what I do now, which is brain coaching with Dr. Amen, amino acid therapy coaching all across the US. And, we look at it like, I'm sure the food was shitty in jail. I mean, just tell me a minute about like how nasty it was.
Oh gosh. It's funny because I used to make fun of military chow all the time, and prison chow was on a whole new level. I mean, it was garbage. And for somebody who tries to pay attention to what he eats, I could barely stomach it because I'm used to eating elk. I'm spoiled because I'm used to eating like whole foods, and there was nothing whole about any meal. I mean, it was whatever scraps they could put together. And that's the point, I guess. When you're in jail, they're suffering because you're like, I don't ever want to come back to this. And I got that, but everything was just like, man, it made me miss the military because I thought the military was bad, especially the Army, because the Army isn't very good at treating its soldiers great. But it was on a whole new level. I mean, it was everything about the entire experience, from the conditioning to the pan, the bunk that you sleep on is a metal pan, and there's a cushion they issue you, but the cushion is just a flat mat. It's like a piece of material, and you don't have a pillow. And I already have back issues, which is why I likely have more back issues because of that. But I already have back issues. So on top of all the cortisol and the stress that I was going through, there was no sleep, there was no rest, there was no recovery. And it was just struggle. And the pain was horrific. I'm trying to think if there was anything that was good about jail besides God's lesson. There was nothing that was good about it. There was something good about it in the relationship I had with the other men that was there, because I started to realize, just like I have known in teaching with Phil Craft, that a lot of the things that I do in preparedness have nothing to do with preparing people for a tangible reaction to a worst case scenario. It's more about the mental side. It's more about building resilience. It's more about instilling community and giving people the sense of purpose. I noticed there was a lot of sense of purpose in jail, and there was a lot of lost souls who were looking for something. And man, it broke me. I mean, it really did.
There's a scripture in the Bible that I actually had prayed for my son for 10 years, and he was in the Navy, but it was Jeremiah 29:11. And when I thought about that, I really kind of thought about you, where Jesus says, "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans for good and not for harm." And it's those trials that get us to the other side. It's the faith that we believe that things are going to be okay. But with all this that has happened, what has changed for you on the perspective of you looking and viewing at the justice system in the state of Utah?
Oh, man. I've been such a believer in good people and institutions wanting to do right. And I wholeheartedly believe there are good people everywhere. But what I've realized about society, because I specifically teach it in resilience and in a course called Rewilding, our society, which is a representation obviously of people, is broken. Every statistic, mental health, which includes suicide, drug overdoses, murder, the lack of the father in the home, all of those statistics, bad, are up. All the good is down. And what that means is if society is a representation of people's mental health, is we're a whole bunch of lost souls belonging to institutions, and through whatever reason, a lot of those institutions are being impacted and affected by those broken people. And in my instance with Provo Police Department, especially Provo Police Department, for example, the two officers that were involved in my case, a young officer who was a patrol officer, and for context, I'm not a police officer. I grew up in a law enforcement home, but for context, I've trained law enforcement for 20 years of my life. For about 10 years in the military when I was a special operator, and also 10 years of commitment to law enforcement and backing the blue and teaching them for free most of the time, any opportunity that I could. And I say that for the context that I understand their culture, I understand who they are, and I also understand the good that potentially comes with the bad. Or I should say the bad that overall comes with the good. The officer that was in charge of this specific case was a sergeant, and the junior officer that dealt with me initially was a young patrol officer. So you have a young patrolman who's been on the job for a couple of years. He's in his 20s. I was a Green Beret sniper working a bachelor's degree in between missions in combat as a 25-year-old, which this guy is. And he's a patrol officer trying to do a complex investigation that includes weighing whether or not a human being deserves to be put in prison for 30 years versus not. He not only was incompetent in his job and his specific role, but he lied. He flat out lied. He said, for example, that my spouse had a broken wrist. She never had a broken wrist. In fact, she never had an injured wrist. She said that her wrist was grabbed in an egregious way. You would potentially, I don't know, as a unbiased investigator, weigh in on the medical expertise of an assessment or an examination, or I don't even know, like maybe a conclusive x-ray. Every single one of those things, all three of those things said there was no soft tissue injury, there was no broken wrist, and there was no damage. So there was no bruising, no swelling, no hairline fracture, no fracture at all, nothing. And so when you actually take somebody's side of the story, because I don't know, they're going through postpartum or they're just egregiously lying, which in this case, I don't think it was that. I think it was mental health issues. When you take that, you use facts and then sway your decision based on the investigation, looking for those facts. This officer used all of the things that a beautiful young mother said with her infant son based on a statement and shaped the narration of that in his affidavit and police report based on that. So the facts, no injury, no break, no nothing. He also said I broke down the door. I'm 6'1", 220 plus pounds on a good day. I've actually lost, since this event took place, I lost 15 pounds. So at the time, 230 pounds. I wear a size 13 boot. My doors in my home are hollow core like everybody else's doors. He said I knocked down the door. Why is that important in context? Well, one, I'm a military breacher. I have been to every breaching course, explosive, mechanical, ballistic, every breaching course that the U.S. military holds. I've been to that qualification. I actually was a heavy breacher and a breacher for the CIA as well. Why does that matter? Well, because I know how to breach a door without doing potential damage to it. I know the most efficient and effective way to go through a door, an obstacle. They said I broke down the door. And why would that matter to a civilian? Well, just like DCFS did, when they heard that, here's what they said. The physician is, okay, so the doctor said there could be what's called subtle lucency, which is contrasting on an image, which means it could be something there, but we don't know. The physician assistant said there's a suspected hairline fracture. No proof of it. Actually, the doctor said there wasn't. The PA said there's suspected hairline fracture. Again, not conclusive. The cop said broken wrist on the affidavit. The cop relays that to DCFS. DCFS says broken arm.
The young
So,
cop, the one that with very little experience.
yeah, so it goes this way instead of going this way, right? In the hierarchy of like a chain of custody with information, it
Right.
goes the opposite way. So when DCFS interviews me, they say, Mike, you broke your spouse's arm and you kicked down a door. And I'm like, what?
Oh my gosh.
So this is the auspice and the information they're going off to make life critical decisions for me and my family, including taking my child away into state Utah custody based on that circumstance. So I said, one, I didn't break her arm. I never touched her wrist. I never broke her wrist. I don't know what you're talking about. And I sure as hell never broke down a door. So the reason that's important is because the cops actually videotaped my door swinging on its hinges with zero damage to the door. Because what I did, because my spouse slammed the door and locked it behind her, and I'm thinking, worst case scenario, my spouse is potentially having an event, a manic episode. I ran up there, I turned the doorknob, I pushed the door through, and literally made entry. They said I broke down the door. DCFS said he was so aggressive and so outraged, he knocked down the door, which I would say and venture to entertain that for anybody would be nearly impossible, because you would need explosive charges or a shotgun for breaching to actually bust all three hinges to take a door down. And so it wasn't busted down. Again, he shaped a narrative.
Yes.
What he wanted to compel to the world that I did, which he did.
Let me ask you a question. Did he know who you were?
Laurie, the first words out of his mouth when he sat down with me, the first words, which are, by the way, all of this, I hope one day comes out, it likely come out in my own civil litigation. On camera, his first words to me when I sat down was, I want you to know I know who you are. And it wasn't like, I know who you are and we're going to get through this. And look, you know, you're a professional, I'm a professional. It was like, I know who you are and I don't care who you are because I'm going to burn you to the ground. And I'm paraphrasing the psychology of how I felt. He said that was the first words out of his mouth before he even asked me a question.
So like a young rookie thinking oh my gosh, this is really going to move me up the ladder here because I am here with Mike Glover.
What's more interesting is, I mean, there's those two significant components of lying around that. Here's the most damaging. The most damaging is when I went to jail, I had 4 felonies: aggravated assault, serious bodily injury, 3 counts of child endangerment, which were all class 3 felonies, and 2 misdemeanors. 1 misdemeanor for breaking my own door, which I never did, and 1 misdemeanor for unlawful detention, which is the complete opposite of what I did because I told my spouse actually to leave. I didn't tell her to stay. I told her to leave. While I was in jail, that's 30 years of charges, by the way. In culmination, that's 30 years, especially with the class 2 felony, which carries 15 years in jail and is considered aggravated assault with serious bodily injury, which again is the equivalent of beating somebody with a baseball bat into a coma. When I was in jail on day 5, my lawyer notified me that I just caught another class 3 felony, which is a 5-year charge. And I was like, what? So imagine you're in jail for something you didn't do, and then your lawyer tells you while you're in jail, you just caught another charge. The charge that I caught, tampering with a witness, which is a class 3 felony. And I'm like, what? What did I do? And I'm so confused. So I take a step back and I'm like, I don't know what's going on. On day 7, the day I bail, I find out from the corrections officer who is putting everybody back into their jail cell because we were on a rec break when I came back from court, which was inside the jail. He tells me to come to him. And I say, okay. And I go to him. And he goes, Mike, let me tell you something. And he's like, I want you to know that Provo PD is targeting you. And I said, okay, what does that mean? Like, why would you say that? He said, man, I've been doing this job for over a decade. It's one of the reasons I never became a cop, because they eat their own. These guys came in here on day 2 and started listening to your voice recordings over your jail phone voice recordings on day 2, and I've never seen them do that. They do that in murder investigations. They do it in anything that has to do with children. I've never seen them do it for a domestic violence situation. And I said, yeah, I just caught a class 3 felony the other day. And the cop says, I know, be careful. And I was like, oh my God. So I get out. I have that charge as soon as I bail. That following week, the district attorney for the 4th District Court of Utah, which is all the serious crimes that happen in Utah, they dismiss it immediately. Well, why? Well, one, I had a waiver signed by my spouse on day 2, which is why I contacted my spouse. I teach law enforcement. I'm not a dummy. I'm not telling anybody on the phones, hey, did you hear what happened? We got to do something to change the way this is going down. Never said anything. The reason they got me on witness tampering is because they said I talked to the witness, that I had a waiver signed on. So they were so hell bent on trying to get me to burn me to the ground and bury me underneath the jail. They made up a fake charge. The district attorney saw that and was like, this is stupid. Get rid of this. He got rid of it. Guess what happens? Because the municipal court, which is Provo PD underneath that with the city of Provo, has the ability to take that charge and since they were the originator of that charge in 4th District Court, they are allowed to shop it through city attorneys.
Oh my gosh.
The municipal court is right above. It's literally in a building down the road that's literally above traffic court. It is like people who have they threw a piece of litter out of their car and are in court. They Provo PD shopped the charge and got it refiled for contacting the witness while in custody. So I had to go, even after that was dismissed, and after my criminal case was dismissed, I had to go back to jail, or I had to go back to court to fight a class 2 or a class B misdemeanor that had 6 months in jail. I had to go back and contest it. The judge saw it. They saw the waiver that I had been signed, and they said, okay, we'll do what's called plea in abeyance. They said, basically, if you don't get put in jail in the next 6 months, we'll just make it all go away. And from our perspective, they wanted it to go away, and we wanted it to go away, so we made it go away. That is the level of incompetency and also misconduct of them targeting me and going after me. Lastly, as a part of this, it's not lastly, but just for the sake of time, the sergeant who was a former detective, I so desperately want to say his name, but he will be the source of this litigation. He had his own domestic violence issue 2 years ago that was swept under the rug by Provo PD in almost nearly the same circumstance. And there are people in the department who literally came to him like, why would you try to burn down Mike for something where there's no physical evidence, where you didn't give him the benefit of the doubt, and you had your own situation when you did this, and he shrugged it off and blew it off. And I'm like, this is the city, and this is the country that we live in.
Government at its finest.
It's insane. It's insane.
That's crazy. So fast forward now. Do you feel that you can have an impact on helping change the way the justice system works?
Look, for the first time in my life, I've actually considered politics. And look, hundreds of thousands of law-abiding, good people in this country aren't even registered to vote. Why? Because we think our position and our power isn't enough. And I teach people, like, if you don't think that you can impact the government, then take care of yourself and your family, because that's really important to do right now. But I also think this entire circumstance has made me realize that maybe there is a bigger plan for me, and maybe with all the tactical, strategic, and academic experiences I've had through life, experiences, not sitting in a classroom, but experiences, that I might be better served down the road to be in a position like in the Senate, for example, where, you have 2 elected officials per state representing in the Senate, where I might want to run for Senate. because that's where I think we can make the influence and impact. Albeit there's a lot of different positions, including your own as host of communicating and educating people, especially for topics that are left in the dark. I think that's important, and I feel like there's a calling there. I'm doing a lot of praying and sorting through that with my family. But as soon as the dust settles, I think I'm going to be on that path and that journey.
Well, we all know that there's so much corruption out there. I mean, we see it not only in our state, but every state across the US, which, is horrendous, and it's sick on what's going on. But so let's switch over to after you get out. Obviously, it affected you emotionally. A lot of damage done, to you and your wife, your reputation, all the lies and misinformation that are still going around on social media. So how do you feel coming out? I mean, because let's face it, you had a team, you had a good support network, including the support of your wife behind you after everything cleared the air and the truth was being told. So the hard thing is for the people coming out that have no one. But how did that affect you emotionally when you came out on like day one? How do you get back to life?
It's tough. I'm still trying to sort through it. It's like you have so much. Successful people typically have so much confidence in who they are. And when you get derailed in something that you stand for, that's not a virtue signal because you talk about it, but it's something that you live. Like my family and everybody who knows me that's very close to me knows my family is the most important thing to me. There's nothing more important than God. So when I am represented in, let's call it the social media space, as somebody who's the opposite of what I represented, I'm offended. But I also have realized in my own fight for survival that people's opinion of me have really never mattered. I mean, I wouldn't be a 10-year entrepreneur. I mean, you and your husband know exactly what that means. It's like you're not an entrepreneur because you're worried about people's opinions. It's like you're in a fight for your own security, a potential legacy, giving your family and opportunities that you never had. It's a lot bigger and broader than that. And so, one, it showed me and demonstrated to me that people are going to have opinion of you no matter what. And that's okay. I pray for the people who have gross opinions of me just as much as I pray for the people that I love the most in my life. Because at the end of the day, I know who I am, and I know that, again, God has a plan. When it comes to the actual day-to-day habits, behaviors, and even getting back into the groove of things, yours is like the second podcast that I've done, and I really don't know. Let me put it this way. I don't really feel comfortable in my skin anymore. And so I have to restart and relearn how to get through that one day at a time. What's really helped me, and I've told you this before, is, for people that don't know, you're my health coach. And I would say more so, you're my mental health coach, because a lot of the things that we've been focused on that you've helped me through is providing substance and nutrients for my brain that has been very damaged prior to this. Like I'm 100% service connected disabled, total and permanent, from a military experience with traumatic brain injury and post-traumatic stress. And then this happens. So I'm dealing with this double-edged sword that the only way to get back to it is to start by looking at it from a grassroots perspective and feeding it foundationally. And so I will tell you that that's helped a lot, because before that, I didn't have any kind of sense of how to get back to anything. Now, at least my brain, at least I'm getting sleep, because I don't know, a week.
8 hours of sleep. That's a lot.
I've gotten it for the first time recently based on us flexing, adapting the protocol. that you've helped me with. And we've had to dial and refine that really. I mean, you've had to do that for me, just like really tight, because my brain has been so traumatized by this event. And also my spouse, she's going through the same deal, following the same protocols, and it's not been easy. So I think that's part of the process. It's like the grieving process.
Right.
You're just going to have to go through it one step, one phase at a time. And what I truly believe, because I am a believer and I understand how this works through past traumas, I'm going to be better off for it when it's all said and done.
I think you're right. And, Mike, I think one of the things, that we're working on with nutrition and amino acid, therapy. I mean, it would be awesome to do a class at Fieldcraft where we could help the police officers who are constantly in this fight flight because who knows what they're doing, chasing like drug cartel, chasing the illegal immigration, who knows? And they're always in this fight flight, and it's hard to turn your brain off. And when you don't feed the brain first, which you now know, you need that nutrition, you need those amino acids every 4 hours. You emotionally can say and do things that you don't necessarily mean. And that's because your brain is starving, which is what they do not only in the jail cells, but in all of the recovery systems out there where, think about it, you go to the doctor's office. I mean, even somebody in cancer, and what do you come out to? Like a bowl full of sugar. And you go to a recovery place, and what's out there? Bagels, all this crap food, and they're not feeding the brain first. And when you don't feed the brain, you don't make the right choices. It's like that empty sock drawer that never gets filled, and you still need a pair of socks, but there's never any socks in there to put on your feet. And that's really what is happening, not only in the justice system, what happened to you, but even in the addiction and in the recoveries. So what is your focus moving forward? And how can I bring awareness to others who have experienced the emotional issues, the social media bashing, the lies and the misinformation that hurt you personally? It's hurting your career. It's hurting your business. What's your focus moving forward?
Yeah, it's the focus moving forward, and you've helped me with this as a priority, is getting my wellness and health back in order. Like the oxygen mask coming down in the aircraft, like if you can't serve yourself to get into a better position to serve, you can't service others. And you can't do that, especially in your own family, if you're not taking care of yourself. And so taking care of myself is the number one priority. And that includes faith, that includes prayer, that includes my brain, my body. I know I'll be having surgery here in 4 to 6 weeks with my spine. So, we've been talking about that and getting through it without taking any opiates and avoiding that at all cost. It's also picking up the pieces for Fieldcraft. I mean, Fieldcraft Survival has been my passion for the last decade because I believe so heartedly in helping others with other people's expertise, like even yours, getting that education information to people who are trying to prepare themselves, not just for the worst case scenario, but just for life's obstacles, is really important. But this entire circumstance has derailed my company. I mean, we took a 50% hit in revenue. I lost my book deal for a period of time. I also had to lay off several employees that I never wanted to lay off because we had to balance the books.
And Mike, I just want to add to that because on one of your podcasts, and I admired, honestly, I mean, being a business owner ourselves, you had said on one of your podcasts that the people who work for you, you said they left their jobs to get a purpose, and that's why they were at Fieldcraft. So I know wholeheartedly that was not easy on you because I know that they're your second family and that you care about them And I just wanted to put that out there because I caught that on that podcast and it was amazing to me.
Yeah, it's very difficult, as you know, as a business owner I mean, your employees are the backbone of your company. And for me, especially being in a situation where I was helpless, I was nearly helpless. Yeah, sure, there's a lot of things that I could do with my legal team to get through it. But any position that I took, especially in the public eye, would have further, at the position that I was in, potentially degraded business and our relationships with others, which it did. Even my first statement, which I thought was very subtle, which I had to do like 10 times for the lawyers, there were companies that were jumping ship. And when you look at these employees who have committed themselves in a cause, that's what it is. It's not like, I mean, a lot of these people are so well educated, they could have a lot more opportunities in businesses and corporations working for them, but they believed in the mission. And so they believe like, hey, I potentially am going to take a pay cut. I potentially am going to commit more time because there's a greater good to instilling preparedness into people. And so it was just tough. It's been one of the hardest things about this whole experience is, one, it could have been prevented. Two, there's really no repentance from a legal perspective because law enforcement officers in this country have qualified immunity. Now, what these officers don't realize in their own bragging, which was a thing, these officers bragged about having qualified immunity, is that they're going to get sued over civil rights violations. And my mediation component to this litigation is going to be them losing their jobs, because I don't think any officer who abuses their powers should ever be in a position behind a badge. And if that doesn't happen, then we'll litigate and turn the entire Provo Police Department inside out, and we'll just accept that reality. But
And
yeah,
sometimes that's what needs to happen in
yes.
order for someone's butt cheeks to tighten up, because
Yeah,
there's
for
just
sure.
so much abuse out there, especially when they think they're wearing a badge. They think like, oh, here I am, I'm the police officer, but they're still harming other people.
Yeah, there's no doubt. Look, there. In fact, in Provo PD, there's several officers that I know that are great human beings that were letting us know what was going on the inside. That's actually doing your job. That's actually taking up for people's civil rights. That's actually doing the right thing. And then there's officers that are like any other department, like any other institution, that shouldn't be there, shouldn't have the badge. And we all know who that is. Like, I teach SWAT teams where they know who the guys are that shouldn't have that badge. And the difference is the compromising of the integrity of the legal system that polices law-abiding citizens, and you get crossover and you get this gray area that should never be acceptable in those institutions. But it is. It's just part of the culture. And hopefully this litigation, hopefully like us talking about it, does some good, because there's a lot of bad that we have to deal with.
And I think that a public apology is necessary for you.
100%.
So
Yeah.
I'm going to give you the last words, but before I do that, tell us a little bit about your book, Prepared. We have it online for the people that are watching. Tell us about that, how they can get it, how we can support you moving forward.
Yeah, the best way to support me is to support yourself in your own individual preparedness. And I would just offer, I would never conclusively say that we're the end all be all solution to it, but we have Fieldcraft Survival. You can go to the .com, and we have a Rolodex of experts, of opportunities, whether physical training, online training, or products to get better prepared. And there's a lot. The journey for somebody who's thinking about being prepared, for me, was writing this book called Prepared. It was like, I wanted to write a book for everybody, because I think disaster for many people is an equal opportunist. It doesn't care what background you come from, what your political affiliation is. And so if you're interested in the idea, the Audible version of that book is available wherever Audible books are found. Prepared is available all over the place. It's a national best-selling book. which is impactful and I'm very appreciative of, which tells me that people are paying more attention to the idea of being prepared. And the concept behind it is not to scare the crap out of you and to fear monger about this idea that impending doom and fear are going to lead you to preparedness. But it's this idea to shape an understanding that if you're more prepared, you're replacing with those skill sets and the confidence, you're replacing that with the fear, and it's making you better prepared overall, which is obviously my hypothesis about why special operators come out on top all the time. It's not because of any one thing. It's because we live a culture and lifestyle of being prepared. So if you wake up and you actually live a lifestyle of it, you don't have to feel paranoid because you're not paranoid. You're confident. And for some reason, partly ego, partly arrogance, people think that if you are the person thinking or even talking about preparedness, then you're some paranoid schizophrenic who's worried about fear and impending doom. It's like, no. That's the complete opposite. If you're prepared, you're very confident in your capabilities. That is a manual for that, and that's the reason I wrote it.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So I'm hoping that you're going to have a class for all of us who could also be affected by what happened to you. You know, most people out there don't even know their legal rights, let alone, the Constitution or what to do. So hopefully you'll be able to bring together yourself, maybe an attorney, so that if someone like me or somebody else out there, if that were to ever happen, that they can be prepared. So maybe that's prepared too.
Yeah, I think it needs a revision. And I also think we'll be adding it to our personal defense block, which is the course that you went through with Amber.
Yes.
Because that understanding, especially from a legal doctrinal perspective, is very important. A lot of people think talking to the police is always a good thing. And even me, who teaches personal defense, tells people, look, give them enough information to build confidence that your perspective was one from self-defense or at least the right position. My entire understanding and idea of that has completely changed. I would not talk to the police for 1 second. I would not mention one word, because everything you say will be used against you and likely against you in a court of law. And I would definitely need to revise Prepared, because it would be maybe a whole second book.
Yeah. Now, so how do we find Fieldcraft? What's the website?
It's fieldcraftsurvival.com, all of our socials. That way, if I was going to push people to any of the things that we do, check out our YouTube channel, because we do have a lot of free education on how to get started. And then we also have the Fieldcraft Survival application, which is another way to get started wherever apps are found. And it's not like all the cool gun stuff. It's like canning and jarring, first aid, situational awareness, the things that aren't typically the coolest stuff.
Okay. Well, I look forward to continuing another talk. I'm honored to be working with you on nutrition and amino acids. I hope that you and I can have some impact on some other people who really just don't know about the starving brain. So, Mike, thank you very much from the bottom of my heart. Thank you for having the courage to speak up. Thank you for protecting our freedom for the last 18 years. It's people like you standing up for freedom for people like me. And I'm very honored and I'm very blessed to have got to know you and your family. So thank you very much. This will be recorded. We'll get it over to you, and we hope other people will be listening. So thank you and have a great night.